But he's also host of the Michigan Podcast and publisher of Wolverine Digest, which is part of the Sports Illustrated family. You can follow Steve on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. Steve, thanks for joining us once again. Hope all is still well in your world. How are you?
Indeed, gentlemen, the Lions invented a new way to lose yesterday. So it feels as if normalcy is beginning to return. I mean, if you're a Detroit Lions fan, this is a franchise, you and I were talking about this, Mark, off the air. It exists to only do two things: nut punch its fans and clarify obscure NFL rules. Okay. And so like yesterday, you learned that if you demonstrate how someone else did something to you, you can get kicked out of an NFL game for that. And so, again, I mean, this is the public service the Detroit Lions serve.
There is no doubt snatching defeat from the jaws of victory since 1958. And I mean, it was, you are right, Steve. The Tigers fooled everybody and got to within a game of 500. Well, they've lost 6 in a row. The Lions spit up all over themselves in the final in the whole fourth quarter, but really at the end. I mean, it is as normal as life has felt in the state of Michigan in a while, isn't it?
Indeed. It feels like 2020 is turning around. I mean, ever since Anthony Fauci got that in his throat and he couldn't talk for a month, it really seems like that was the turning point. Now I'm reading about Reese's peanut butter, cupcakes are coming out, and 2020 is turning around, guys. You can feel the momentum is changing.
All right. Is there momentum enough to get the Big Ten presidents to schedule and decide to re-vote on whether or not to play football? Is this really happening, or is it just something that's going to be talked about happening?
No, we're hearing that this is really happening. We are hearing that Dr. Schlissel has gotten the message loud and clear. And, he's learning right now, you never fight a land war in Asia. Okay. I mean, he's getting it from both ends now. I mean, the Karens on his faculty are in a revolt. We're all going to die here by teaching. He's got resident advisors, or RAs. When I lived on Wonders Hall, that's what we call them. But RAs they're striking. Cafeteria workers are striking. His football program is protesting. I mean, he is hanging, by a very slim thread in the border regions. Love that about him. Okay. So he's going to give in on this one because the peasants stormed the Bastille, and it's either this or the guillotine next. So yeah, he was the holdout here. He's going to vote to play football. And I think without his cover as an immunologist, a couple of other Big Ten schools that we've heard all along did not want to play. Minnesota, Rutgers, they're kind of without their fig leaf now. And so they're just negotiating the final parameters of how this is all going to look politically. But I wouldn't be surprised if you even had an announcement today. And I think when you get an announcement, if they were smart, which they have not been this entire process, but if they should do the whole enchilada. Now, the schedule committee led by Barry Alvarez met yesterday with the presidents. They should have this whole thing laid out so that we can say to everybody, here is when this starts, practice begins, and we're off. And I think and I hope that's what they're going to see rather than another piecemeal, leagueocracy like we've had for the last month.
Steve, we've seen this in different facets. I mean, the Tennessee fans got rid of coaches before they ever got hired, and they were about to hire guys, and the fans caused such an uproar that they changed their tune. I have felt all along that while all of these stories, but hey, the Big Ten's going to start, there's never been a name behind it. I think that the athletic directors and football coaches deserve a ton of credit for using the media that are lapdogs for Big Ten football to get the narrative out to get football played, because they have been there have been stories after story after story about they're going to play with no real sources behind it, but it's created great momentum for those that want football.
I completely agree. I think what's happened here is they realized that there's a certain cachet of reporters out there that essentially their sources are within the Big Ten administration. And all of the stories that you had seen about this for several months were all from the Karen administrative perspective. And I think they got smart and said, we got to start leaking to some, sports writers that actually like sports and get the counter narrative out there, because that's actually where the fans are. That's where the readers are, but they need ammunition, meaning you can instinctively feel or know or want something, but if you don't have a platform to galvanize you and that belief system, it's just a notion, it's a sentiment. And I think that's one of the key tactics here that was played. That was very smart. I also think one of the things that happened too is, the presidents are this nebulous group of people. Last week Rutgers president sounded off on Trump, and this cheap politics aren't going to force me to play. And the world was like, wait, Rutgers as a president. And I think that what we needed was a singular villain. Every successful campaign needs a singular villain or goal. And I think Mark Schlissel being placed as the face of that, and I'll give myself a little bit of credit for it, I think helped, because it gave a name to the nebulous presidents. Well, how do I email the presidents? How do I protest the presidents? Is it the presidents at big10.org? I mean, how do I reach out to these people? And so they did a masterful job coming out initially with covering their tracks. Well, the Minnesota school president, she's still not sure if she voted or not. Okay, so once there was a singular name, a Snidely Whiplash that could be, a brand that could be put on this, and it went national, then it became easier to kind of galvanize that last sector of resistance. And you saw that the entire Michigan football family, basically in the last week, has openly defied, both people working for the university and proud alums like a Brian Greasy, who work now prominently in the media, have defied Mark Schlissel on this, and they lost the narrative. And I think that's why we're going to get Big Ten football back. And then I hate to say this because I'm a Bo guy. I'm to hell with Notre Dame guy. Okay. But no, Trevor Lawrence initially saved the season back in August with #LetThemPlay. Notre Dame, as one of the top universities in the country, elite private school with a austere religious tradition and everything else, their willingness to push through this. A source told me that one of their provosts told the faculty there last week that if they knew back in March what they know now about COVID, they would have never shut the school down in the first place. Their willingness to push through this and put all of their cachet and tradition and brand behind it really gave schools like Michigan and all these Big Ten schools no political cover whatsoever. And so Notre Dame deserves a lot of credit, I think, for also saving this college football season.
Well, Steve, I think it was when we first had you on, but we made the comment, we did not understand how Big Ten fan could handle watching Notre Dame play an entire season and play it in a conference. We really thought that a Big Ten fan was going to combust because of it. And Steve, what I think happened is that the university presidents found out what life is like in the political and sports world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, no, seriously.
Yep.
I mean, you can listen. We in the media deserve a lot of grief. Politicians deserve all the grief they get. But the political world and the sports world, you deal with reactions and people criticizing you. And this is how our world is. University presidents, they don't get nasty letters. They don't get nasty emails. Nobody knows their names. And now they did. You put out there who the university presidents are, their names, and hundreds of thousands of people started calling them the way they call their congressmen. And Steve, they're backpedaling like Dion in his prime.
That's exactly right. And it goes to show why, I mean, at this point, Twitter is basically sitting down in a stall. Here I sit lonely-hearted, and then finishing the sentence, right? I mean, that's essentially what Twitter is most days. But 1 out of a million, these platforms and what we do for a living, and the messiness of our political process. Every now and then, though, it provides an opening for the good guys to win, and this is one of those times. What you just said, David, these presidents. That's why I said before in our previous interview, I do think this is political, but I don't think it's about the election. I really don't. And I say this as somebody who works full time in politics. Okay. I mean, I'm used to seeing everything get politicized, but I think this has been politicized in the way that these presidents thought that they were going to be able to kind of return Big Ten athletics back to its pre-Jim Delaney, pre-Penn State, pre-BTN, greener pastures and idyllic notions, so that they can all have the moral high ground. I mean, I know of a Michigan. I was told that, from somebody at Michigan, that they literally heard from one of the scientists there that, the SEC is just a bunch of rednecks who view their players expendable. Well, that's why I went out and started researching. Okay, if you think that, let's look at what the grades for the medical schools in the ACC are. North Carolina right now is the #1 med school for primary care in the country, according to U.S. News and World Report. So they don't care. The Hippocratic Oath, what is it? They don't care. At North Carolina, the #1 med school in the country doesn't care about its reputation at all. That's not a defensible position, but they've not had to defend positions like this in our footprint before. And I think, Mark, you talked about Tennessee fan. Big Ten fan went Tennessee fan in the last month. And these presidents in the end couldn't handle it because they've never faced that kind of scrutiny before, as David pointed out.
And they are getting it now. Now, the other side of this, while this is all going on, the place where you and I went to school, they're having a bit of an outbreak. I've challenged a few people when I saw the numbers, and there are 40,000 students there. And even if half of them are around, what's worse, the outbreak or the bait and switch to get them to pay for dorm rooms this year? But how much time do they have? Because, Steve, we've already seen, a few Big 12 games get postponed, 3 more that they wish would have been postponed so that the Sun Belt didn't dominate them over the weekend. Do they have time for outs? If we start on the 17th, which seems to be the date, October 17th, seems to be the uniform date I've been hearing for 3 or 4 days. Do they have outs in case there are problems?
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is an 8-game schedule. I think the football people want to play 9. I think the athletic directors with another week of TV games want to play 9. But because of this, what I think you'll see, even in the SEC, they had to give some alms to the presidents, even in the athletic-minded SEC. And so that alm that they gave the presidents was not to start until the end of September, to let that initial wave of positive tests when the students return kind of subside and grant them some political cover. All right. I think what will happen is the alm that will be given the Big Ten presidents here will be an 8-game schedule in 10 weeks. There's exactly 10 weeks between October 17th and December 19th and 20th, which is where you have to play your Big Ten playoff game, your championship game, in order to be in there in time for the playoffs. And so I think you'll see an 8-game schedule in those 10 weeks with 2 byes. Maybe the very last week in December will be for makeup games, another bye in the middle of the year. Remember, that's what they did with their initial schedule. I think that is the schedule that they will come up with here today or very soon.
If they start October 17th, they'll have 3 Saturdays in October, 4 in November, and then the first 2 in December. That would give them 9 Saturdays to play 8 games before a Big Ten title game on December 19th or 20th. Steve, any doubt in your mind that A, there is a revote, and B, that it passes? Because they need at least 9 yeses. And if Maryland, Minnesota, and Rutgers are 3 no's, they don't have a lot of wiggle room.
No, I work in politics, like I've said before. I have seen more stupidity than the average American ever should. Okay. But this would be intergalactic, guys. Okay. This would be like, Darth Helmet sticking his head in the wall. Okay. This to go through this entire thing. If you thought you had it up, you were up against it before, and then you go through this entire dog and pony show, but in public, and then you still don't do it again while the rest of these conferences push through, I can't even imagine what would happen then. Now you've got TV partners pissed at you and everything else. No, I think the intent of this was to go ahead and give them all the cover they need. I think you're going to see the advances in testing will be what they will use to save face. But I think that this was all done in order to go ahead and give them the justification to give in to what their fans and their programs want.
Any chance that any of the teams in the Big Ten sit out if it's passed?
I don't think so either. I think, this is kind of a hang together or hang separately Ben Franklin moment. And I think Brett McMurphy reported this last night that if the league votes to play, they're all going to play. There's just too many scheduling difficulties in a conference schedule of what that will look like. Listen, you want to talk about bad optics. One of the first, I think it was the very first saliva test that the FDA approved for COVID-19 was at the University of Illinois. Okay. That's one of your member schools. One of your member schools has FDA approval for instant saliva tests. And that's not good enough for the other members of your own league to go and use to play. What does that say? Either the University of Illinois sucks at this, or you weren't interested in ever playing football. And I think this is where all the political cover now is blown for these guys. And I think that's, the vote at the University of Minnesota, they voted the regents not to renew fall sports. Well, that was more procedural because you had a group trying to circumvent the ongoing process going on within the presidents. I think they're all going to play.
And I mean, the University of Illinois can't suck at everything.
Not everything, no.
Steve, as always, very appreciative of your time and your insight. Continued success with your show and with the Michigan podcast and with Wolverine Digest. All the best.
You bet, guys. Thank you. Take care.
Steve Deace, you can follow him on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. Deace is in peace. Steve Deace Show. Steve Deace joining us once again here on Miller and Moulton. I hope you love your historical and comedic references because he throws them in almost Dennis Leary-like in how many of them he throws in.
And a Spaceballs reference in there as well. I mean, we had Ben Franklin and Dark Helmet in the same interview. It's pretty solid.
Yes, and can't hide behind their fig leaf any longer.